You're scrolling through Instagram at 2 in the morning and suddenly you stop. There's someone your age living their best life, perfect relationship, dream job, flawless skin, exotic vacation. Your thumb hovers over the screen and for just a moment you feel it, that hollow ache in your chest, that whisper that says, everyone else has figured it out, and I'm just pretending. Welcome to the authenticity crisis, the defining struggle of our generation. Here's what nobody talks about. Well, we're living in the most connected era in human history, yet we've never felt more disconnected from ourselves. We have access to more information, more opportunities, and more ways to express ourselves than any generation before us. So why does it feel like we're all wearing masks we can't take off? The uncomfortable truth is this: we've become so obsessed with being seen as authentic that we've forgotten what authenticity actually feels like. We're performing realness so hard that we've lost touch with what's real. And the result? An entire generation walking around feeling like frauds in their own lives. But here's where it gets interesting. This crisis isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. It's a symptom of something much deeper, something that's been brewing for decades, maybe even centuries. And once you understand what's really happening, once you see the invisible forces that have hijacked your sense of self, you can finally break free. This isn't just another self-help story. This is about why you feel like you're constantly playing a character, why your inner voice sounds like a critic instead of a friend, and why the very idea of being yourself feels like a foreign concept. Because here's the thing, you're not broken. The system is. Let me tell you about Maya. 26 years old, marketing manager at a tech startup, 15,000 Instagram followers, and by all external measures, killing it. She had the apartment with exposed brick walls, the perfect coffee shop ready outfits, and a relationship that looked straight out of a romantic comedy. Her friends called her goals. Her family was proud. Her LinkedIn was pristine. But Maya had a secret. Every morning she would wake up and feel like she was putting on a costume. Not just her clothes, her entire personality. She'd practiced her laugh in the mirror until it sounded natural. She'd memorized conversation starters that made her seem effortlessly social. She'd curated her interests based on what would make her appear more interesting, more dateable, more hireable. The breaking point came during her birthday party. Surrounded by friends, in her dream apartment, wearing an outfit that had gotten 347 likes, Maya excused herself to the bathroom and had a panic attack. Not because anything was wrong, but because everything was supposed to be right, and she felt absolutely nothing. She looked in the mirror and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd done something simply because she wanted to. Every choice, every word, every photo was calculated for maximum external validation. She'd become a walking algorithm, optimized for approval but starved of genuine experience. Maya's story isn't unique. It's the story of millions of people who've accidentally outsourced their identity to the internet, to their jobs, to other people's expectations. They've become so skilled at being what others want them to be that they've forgotten who they actually are underneath all the performance. But here's what Maya discovered that night, staring at her reflection. The feeling of being fake doesn't come from being dishonest with others. It comes from being dishonest with yourself. And that dishonesty isn't always intentional. Sometimes it's just survival in a world that rewards performance over presence. To understand why we feel fake, we need to go back to the beginning. Not your beginning, humanity's beginning. For thousands of years, humans lived in small tribes where authenticity wasn't a choice. It was a necessity. You couldn't pretend to be someone else when everyone knew your family, your skills, your flaws, and your stories. Your reputation was built on real actions, real relationships, real contributions to the community. There was no gap between who you were and who you appeared to be because there was nowhere to hide. But something changed, and it wasn't social media. That's just the latest chapter in a much longer story. Dr. Sherry Turkle from MIT spent decades studying how technology changes human behavior, and her research reveals something startling. We've been gradually shifting from a culture of authentic connection to a culture of performance for over a century. The telegraph, the telephone, television, email, social media, Each new technology created more distance between our real selves and our presented selves, but the psychological roots go even deeper. Back in the 1950s, psychologist Donald Winnicott introduced a concept that, well, explains a lot: the false self. According to Winnicott, as children, we all develop this false self to protect our true self from rejection or harm. It's essentially a survival mechanism. The issue arises when many of us never learn to take that mask off. Now, here's where it gets a bit unsettling. Modern society has turned the false self into a requirement, not just a defense mechanism. We're often rewarded for being agreeable rather than honest, polite rather than genuine, impressive rather than real. The skills that helped our ancestors survive, like reading social cues, adapting to group dynamics, and managing our image, have now become prisons, trapping us in performances we just can't seem to escape. Research from Dr. Tim Kasser at Knox College reveals that individuals who focus heavily on external validation, such as wealth, fame, and image, report significantly higher levels of anxiety and depression compared to those who prioritize intrinsic values like relationships, personal growth, and authenticity. But here's the kicker. Our entire economic and social system is designed to make us focus on external validation. We're not failing at authenticity. We're succeeding at a game that was rigged from the start. The neuroscience is equally telling. When we act in ways that contradict our values or genuine preferences, it creates what researchers call cognitive dissonance, a literally painful state of internal conflict. Our brains are constantly expending energy to maintain contradictory beliefs about ourselves. No wonder we're exhausted. No wonder we feel fake. We're burning mental fuel just to keep our stories straight. But here's what the research also shows. Authenticity isn't just about feeling better. It's about performing better. Studies consistently demonstrate that people who report higher levels of authenticity show increased creativity, better relationships, stronger resilience, and even better physical health. Being real isn't just morally superior, it's strategically superior. The problem is, nobody taught us how to do it in a world that punishes realness and rewards performance. Now let's talk about the mechanism that turns normal people into chronic imposters: comparison. But not the kind you think. We're told that comparison is the thief of joy, and that's true. But it's not just that we compare ourselves to others, it's that we've lost the ability to stop comparing. Our brains are stuck in a permanent state of measurement, evaluation, and ranking. We don't just compare our lives to other people's highlight reels. We compare our current selves to our past selves, our future selves, and dozens of imaginary versions of ourselves that should exist by now. Social psychologist Leon Festinger called this social comparison theory, but he studied it in the 1950s, when people had maybe a dozen reference points for comparison. Today, we have millions. Every time you open your phone, you're exposed to curated versions of thousands of lives, each one carefully edited to maximize envy and minimize reality. But here's the twist that nobody talks about. The problem isn't that we're comparing ourselves to fake lives. The problem is that comparison itself makes us fake. When you're constantly measuring yourself against others, you stop experiencing your own life and start performing it. You're not asking, what do I want? You're asking, what will make me look good compared to them? This creates what I call the authenticity paradox. The harder you try to appear authentic, to curate the perfect authentic personal brand, to craft the ideal authentic social media presence, to perform the most convincing version of just being yourself, the further you drift from actual authenticity. You become a method actor who's forgotten they're playing a role. The research backs this up. Dr. Mauricio Delgado at Rutgers University used brain imaging to study what happens when people engage in social comparison. He found that comparison literally hijacks the brain's reward system, making external validation more addictive than internal satisfaction. Your dopamine pathways start craving other people's approval more than your own sense of fulfillment. You become neurochemically dependent on being impressive rather than being real. And here's the cruelest part. The more successful you become at impression management, the lonelier you feel, because deep down, You know that people aren't connecting with you, they're connecting with your performance. Every compliment feels hollow because you know it's directed at a character you've created, not the person you actually are. This is why successful people often report feeling like frauds. This is why celebrities struggle with depression. This is why people with perfect-looking lives sometimes feel the emptiest. They've won a game that requires them to lose themselves. Because this isn't just a personal problem, it's a systemic one. We live in what I call the authenticity economy, where being real has become a brand, and brands have become more important than people. Think about it. We have authentic restaurants that spend millions on looking authentically rustic. We have authentic influencers whose authenticity is their primary product. We have companies that hire authenticity consultants to help them appear more genuine. We've turned realness into a marketing strategy, which is perhaps the most inauthentic thing imaginable. This creates a bizarre feedback loop. The more we see performed authenticity everywhere, in advertising, in social media, in personal branding, the more we learn to perform our own authenticity. We start treating our lives like content, our personalities like brands, our relationships like networking opportunities. And then we wonder why everything feels fake. The philosopher Jean Baudrillard predicted this decades ago. He wrote about how modern society would become so saturated with simulations that we'd lose track of what was real. He called it hyperreality, a state where copies become more convincing than originals, where the map becomes more important than the territory. We're living in the hyper-real version of ourselves and, well, we've forgotten where we put the original. Consider the language we use now. We craft our personal narratives, we curate our experiences, we optimize our lifestyles. These are the words of producers, not people living their lives. We've unconsciously adopted the vocabulary of content creation to describe human existence. Is it any wonder we feel like we're always performing? The economic pressures make it worse. In the gig economy, you are your brand. Your personality is your product. Your authenticity is your unique selling proposition. The boundaries between who you are and what you sell have completely dissolved. You can't separate your sense of self from your market value because increasingly they're the same thing. And this is why so many people report feeling like they don't know who they are anymore. They've been treating themselves like a business for so long that they've forgotten they're also a human being. They've optimized themselves out of existence. Here's where we need to make a crucial distinction. There's a difference between adapting to different situations and losing yourself entirely. There's a difference between social skills and social performance, and understanding this difference is the key to breaking free from the authenticity crisis. Authentic people aren't the same in every situation. That would actually be quite inauthentic because real humans are complex and multifaceted. You can be professional at work, playful with friends, and vulnerable with family without being fake. The difference is intention and awareness. When you're being authentically adaptive, you're still connected to your core values, your genuine emotions, and your real preferences. You're like water taking the shape of the container while remaining essentially water. When you're performing, you're like a chameleon that's forgotten its original color. The ancient Greeks had a word for this: eudaimonia. It's often translated as happiness, but it's deeper than that. It's the feeling of living in alignment with your true nature, of being fully yourself in the world. It's not about being the same person everywhere. It's about being a whole person everywhere. Buddhist philosophy offers another perspective through the concept of original face. The idea that beneath all our conditioning, all our learned behaviors, all our adaptive strategies, there's an essential self that remains unchanged. The goal isn't to eliminate all adaptation, it's to stay connected to that essential self while navigating the world. Modern psychology calls this psychological authenticity, and research shows it has 4 key components: awareness of yourself, relational authenticity, which is being genuine in relationships, authentic living, meaning making choices aligned with your values, and authentic existence, which is about accepting influence from others without losing yourself. Notice that none of these require you to be the same person in every context. They require you to be a conscious person in every context. The problem isn't that we adapt to different situations. The problem is that we've lost the thread back to ourselves. We've become so skilled at reading the room that we've forgotten how to read our own hearts. We've become so good at being what others need that we've forgotten what we need. Let's talk about what's happening in your brain when you feel fake. Because this isn't just a philosophical problem, it's a neurochemical one. Every time you post something on social media, every time you say what you think people want to hear, every time you present a polished version of yourself, your brain releases a small hit of dopamine. Not because you're happy, but because you're anticipating validation. Your reward system has been hijacked by external approval. Dr. Anna Lemke, author of Dopamine Nation, explains that this creates a vicious cycle. The more you rely on external validation for dopamine, the less you're able to generate satisfaction internally. You become tolerance-dependent on other people's opinions. Your own thoughts, feelings, and experiences start to feel less real than other people's reactions to them. This is why people often report feeling most fake right after getting the most likes, the most compliments, the most external validation. The dopamine hit is followed by a crash, and in that crash you realize that none of it actually filled the void you were trying to fill. You're left with the empty feeling of having consumed empty calories for the soul. Every inauthentic person is living according to a story they didn't write. These stories usually sound like this: I have to be successful by 30 or I'm a failure. I have to be positive all the time or people won't like me. I have to have it all figured out or I'm behind. I have to be perfect or I'm worthless. These aren't your thoughts. They're cultural downloads, social programming, inherited expectations that you've internalized so completely that they feel like your own voice. But they're not. They're the voice of a system that needs you to feel inadequate, so you'll keep consuming, keep striving, keep playing the game. The ancient Stoics understood this. Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of history's greatest philosophers, taught that the only thing you truly control is your response to what happens to you. Everything else, other people's opinions, societal expectations, even your own past and future, is outside your control. Freedom comes from focusing on what's actually yours, your thoughts, your values, your choices in this moment. But, we've been taught to believe the opposite. We've been taught that our worth comes from controlling things we can't control. Other people's reactions, the perfect outcome, the ideal timeline. We've been taught to live in the future tense, where everything will be okay once we achieve the next milestone, reach the next level, become the next version of ourselves. This is why authenticity feels so foreign. We've forgotten how to live in present tense. We've forgotten how to be satisfied with what is, rather than obsessing over what should be. We've forgotten that the person you are right now, with all your flaws and contradictions and unfinished stories, is not a rough draft of your real life. This is your real life. The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron puts it perfectly. You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement. Both things are true simultaneously. You don't have to wait until you're better to be real. You don't have to wait until you're ready to be yourself. The paradox of authenticity is that it requires you to accept yourself as you are right now, while also remaining open to growth and change. This isn't about lowering your standards or giving up on goals. It's about changing your relationship to those goals. Instead of using them to prove your worth, you use them to express your worth. Instead of achieving to become someone valuable, you achieve because you already are someone valuable. But here's where most advice about authenticity goes wrong. It tells you to just be yourself, as if that's simple, as if you haven't spent years forgetting who that is. It's like telling someone who's been wearing a mask for so long that it's fused to their face to just take it off. The mask has become part of their identity. The real trap is this. In trying to be authentic, many people just create a new performance. They perform authenticity, they curate their realness, they become authentic in the same calculated way they used to be fake. They've just swapped one costume for another. True authenticity isn't a destination you reach or a state you achieve. It's a practice. It's a moment-by-moment choice to stay connected to your actual experience rather than your ideas about your experience. It's the difference between feeling sad and thinking I shouldn't be sad. It's the difference between wanting something and immediately judging that want as wrong or right. The mystic traditions understood this. In Zen Buddhism, there's a concept called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh eyes, without the weight of all your stories about who you are and who you should be. When you have beginner's mind, you're not trying to be authentic, you just are, because you're not defending any particular identity. This is why children seem so naturally authentic until we train it out of them. They haven't yet learned to separate themselves from their experience. They feel angry, so they express anger. They feel joy, so they express joy. They want something, so they ask for it. They don't have a committee in their head evaluating whether their feelings are appropriate or their desires are acceptable. Somewhere along the way, we all develop that committee, and the committee's job is to protect us from rejection, embarrassment, failure. But the committee doesn't know when to stop. It starts evaluating everything, not just how we act, but how we feel, what we want, even what we think. The committee becomes a full-time critic, and we become full-time performers trying to satisfy an audience that can never be satisfied. Let's talk about what this constant performance is actually costing you, because the price of feeling fake isn't just emotional, it's everything. When you're performing yourself rather than being yourself, you're using what psychologists call executive function, the mental energy required for conscious control and decision-making. Imagine if you had to consciously think about every breath you took, every heartbeat, every blink. You'd be exhausted within hours. That's what happens when you have to consciously manage your entire personality. Dr. Roy Baumeister's research on ego depletion shows that this kind of constant self-regulation depletes your mental resources, leaving you less capable of making good decisions, resisting temptation, or handling stress. People who are constantly performing report higher levels of burnout, anxiety, and what researchers call emotional exhaustion. But the costs go beyond individual well-being. When everyone is performing, nobody's connecting. We end up in relationships between personas rather than people. We build networks instead of friendships. We have interactions instead of conversations. The result is a society of people who know each other's brands, but not each other's souls. Think about your last truly satisfying conversation. Chances are it happened when both you and the other person dropped the performance. Maybe you were exhausted or vulnerable or just too tired to maintain the facade. In that moment of realness, you probably felt more connected than you had in weeks. That's not a coincidence. That's your authentic self recognizing another authentic self. The tragedy is that we've been trained to see those moments as mistakes, as lapses in professionalism or social grace. We apologize for being too emotional or too honest or too much. But those moments aren't bugs, they're features. They're glimpses of who you actually are when you're not trying to be anyone in particular. The economic cost is real too. People who feel fake at work report lower job satisfaction, less creativity, and higher turnover rates. Companies that create cultures where people can't be authentic suffer from lower productivity, worse team dynamics, and inability to retain talent. Authenticity isn't just personally beneficial, it's economically beneficial, but we've created systems that punish it anyway. So how do you find your way back to yourself? How do you remove a mask that's been glued on so long you've forgotten what your actual face looks like? The answer isn't what most people expect. It's not about dramatic revelation or sudden transformation. It's about paying attention. Authenticity begins with awareness. Not awareness of who you should be, but awareness of who you actually are right now, in this moment, before you've had a chance to edit yourself. Start with your body. Your body doesn't lie. When you're in a conversation that feels fake, your body knows. Your shoulders tense, your breathing becomes shallow, your smile feels forced. When you're doing something that aligns with who you really are, your body relaxes, your breathing deepens, your expressions become effortless. Learn to read these signals. They're your internal authenticity detector, and they're more accurate than any external feedback you'll ever receive. Your body has been with you longer than any friend, any mentor, any audience. It knows when you're home and when you're in exile from yourself. Next, pay attention to your energy. Real activities, things that align with your genuine interests and values, give you energy even when they're challenging. Performed activities, things you do for external validation or social expectation, drain your energy even when they're easy. Your energy is like a compass pointing toward your authentic self. Notice what you do when nobody's watching. What podcasts do you listen to when you're alone? What makes you laugh when no one's around to judge your humor? What thoughts do you have in the shower when your guard is down? These unguarded moments are breadcrumbs leading back to who you really are. But here's the most important part. Stop trying to be consistent. One of the biggest obstacles to authenticity is the belief that you have to be the same person all the time. Real people are contradictory. Real people contain multitudes. Real people change their minds, have complicated feelings, and don't fit neatly into categories. The goal isn't to find your true self as if you're a fixed entity waiting to be discovered. The goal is to stay connected to your authentic experience as it unfolds moment by moment, without constantly editing it to fit some story about who you're supposed to be. Now let's get practical, because understanding authenticity intellectually is useless if you don't know how to practice it daily. Here are the specific techniques that can help you reconnect with your real self. The 10-second rule. Before you speak in any social situation, take 10 seconds to check in with yourself. What do you actually think about what's being discussed? How do you actually feel? What would you say if you weren't trying to manage anyone's reaction? You don't have to share every thought, but staying connected to your thoughts prevents you from disappearing into pure performance. The energy audit. For 1 week, track your energy levels after different activities, conversations, and decisions. Don't judge what you find, just observe. You'll start to notice patterns. Certain people, places, and activities consistently drain you. Others consistently energize you. Your energy is telling you something important about what's authentic for you and what isn't. The alone test. Spend time doing things you enjoy when you're completely alone, with no possibility of social media documentation or social validation. Read books nobody will ask you about. Take walks with no destination. Cook meals you won't photograph. Do things purely for the experience, not for the story they'll make. This rebuilds your connection to intrinsic rather than extrinsic motivation. The values inventory. Write down your actual values. Not the values you think you should have, but the ones you actually live by when you're not thinking about it. Look at how you spend your time, your money, your attention. These reveal your real priorities more accurately than any aspirational list. Then ask, how much of your life actually aligns with these revealed values? The story revision. Notice when you catch yourself living according to someone else's timeline or definition of success. These stories usually contain words like should, must, or supposed to. When you catch one, ask, Who says? Where did this story come from? Is it actually true for you, or is it just culturally inherited programming that you've never questioned? The feeling practice. Most people who feel fake have lost touch with their emotional life. They know what they think about their feelings, but they don't know what they actually feel. Start checking in with your body throughout the day. Where do you feel tension? Where do you feel ease? What emotions are you carrying that you haven't acknowledged? Your feelings are data about your authentic experience. Here's something crucial that most authenticity advice misses. You can't become authentic in isolation. Authenticity is relational. You discover who you really are through genuine connection with others who are also committed to being real. The people in your life right now fall into roughly 3 categories. First, there are the people who only know your performed self. They're connected to your image, your status, your useful qualities. These relationships, while not necessarily bad, don't feed your authentic self because they're based on incomplete information about who you are. Second, there are the people who've seen behind your performance but use that information against you, who shame you for your struggles, judge you for your complexity, or try to keep you small to manage their own insecurity. These relationships actively harm your authenticity because they punish realness. Third, there are the people who see your full complexity, your light and your shadow, your strengths and your struggles, and remain present with all of it. These are the relationships that heal the authenticity crisis. They're rare, but they're transformational. The research on this is powerful. Dr. Brené Brown's studies on vulnerability show that shame and authenticity cannot coexist. When you're in relationships where you can be vulnerable without being judged, your capacity for authenticity increases dramatically. When you're in relationships where vulnerability is punished, your authentic self goes into hiding. This is why fake it till you make it often backfires. If you're faking it in relationships where realness would be welcomed, you're training yourself to be inauthentic even in safe spaces. You're building muscle memory for performance when you could be building muscle memory for presence. The solution isn't to dump everyone who doesn't perfectly accept your authenticity. That's just another form of control and performance. The solution is to gradually increase your realness in relationships that feel safe, and to consciously choose to spend more time with people who respond well to your authenticity. Sometimes this means having uncomfortable conversations about how you've been showing up versus how you'd like to show up. Sometimes it means risking rejection by being more honest about your struggles, your doubts, your real opinions. But here's what's interesting. People who are also struggling with authenticity often respond to realness with relief, not rejection. Your authenticity gives them permission to be authentic too. Authentic, one of the deepest roots of feeling fake is, well, the cultural belief that you're not enough as you are. This isn't your personal failing. This is systematic programming designed to keep you consuming, striving, and seeking external solutions to internal questions. Just, consider how many industries would collapse if people suddenly felt sufficient as they are. The beauty industry, the self-help industry, large portions of the fashion industry, the comparison-based social media industry. They all depend on you feeling incomplete. They need you to believe that the real you is hidden somewhere under better clothes, better habits, better thoughts, better relationships, better achievements. But what if the real you isn't hidden at all? What if the real you is the one reading these words right now, with whatever thoughts you're having, whatever feelings you're carrying, whatever life circumstances you're navigating? What if authenticity isn't about becoming someone else? It's about accepting someone you already are. The ancient philosophy of Stoicism offers a radical reframe here. The Stoics believed that you already have everything you need for a meaningful life, not because external circumstances don't matter, but because your capacity for wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline isn't dependent on external circumstances. You can be authentically yourself, whether you're rich or poor, famous or unknown, successful or struggling. This doesn't mean you stop growing or striving. It means you stop making your growth and striving contingent on your worth. You grow because you're valuable, not to become valuable. You strive because you're enough, not to become enough. This shift in motivation changes everything. When you operate from a foundation of enoughness, your choices become expressions of who you are, rather than attempts to prove who you are. Your achievements, well, they become gifts you give to the world rather than evidence you present to the court of public opinion. And your failures, instead of being threats to your identity, become learning experiences. This is perhaps the most radical act of authenticity in our current culture, believing that you're sufficient as you are. Not perfect, not finished, not without room for growth, but, sufficient, enough, worthy of love, respect, and belonging right now as you are, without any additions or improvements. So what does an authentic life actually look like in practice? It's not what Instagram would have you believe. It's not perfectly curated, consistently photogenic, or always inspirational. It's messier than that, more human than that, more real than that. An authentic life is one where your public self and your private self aren't dramatically different people. You don't need perfect alignment. Nobody has that. But there should be enough overlap that you recognize yourself in both versions. When people compliment the image you present to the world, you should feel like they're complimenting something real about you, not just your marketing skills. An authentic life is one where you make decisions based on your values rather than your fears. This doesn't mean you ignore consequences or act recklessly. It means that when you're choosing between options, your primary question is, what aligns with who I am, rather than what will make me look good, or what will other people expect. An authentic life is one where you feel comfortable with your own complexity. You don't try to be consistently positive, consistently confident, or consistently anything. You allow yourself to be human, which means being different things at different times, having contradictory feelings, and changing your mind when you learn new information. An authentic life is one where you've made peace with being ordinary. Not mediocre, ordinary. Real. Human-sized rather than Instagram-sized. Successful in ways that matter to you rather than ways that impress other people. Content with small pleasures, simple achievements, and quiet moments that don't translate well to social media. Most importantly, an authentic life is one where you remember that you exist even when nobody's paying attention. Your thoughts matter even when you don't share them. Your experiences are valuable even when you don't document them. Your preferences are valid even when they're not popular. You are real even when you're not performing realness. This isn't about becoming selfish or inconsiderate. Authentic people often care deeply about others, but they care from a place of genuine concern rather than social obligation. They help because they want to help, not because helping makes them look good. They're kind because kindness aligns with their values, not because kindness is expected. Here's what happens when you start choosing authenticity over performance. It's contagious. Not in a dramatic movie-like way, but in quiet, powerful ways that ripple out through every relationship and interaction. When you stop performing, you give other people permission to stop performing too. When you admit you don't have it all figured out, others feel safe to admit the same. When you share your real struggles rather than your highlight reel, you create space for actual connection rather than competitive comparison. This isn't about oversharing or making every conversation heavy and deep. It's about being present to what's actually happening rather than managing what people think is happening. It's about responding to what people are actually saying rather than what you think they want to hear. The research on emotional contagion shows that authenticity spreads through social networks just like any other emotional state. When you interact with someone who's genuinely present, your own stress levels decrease. When you're around someone who's comfortable with their own imperfections, you become more comfortable with yours. But the most profound change happens within you. When you stop trying to control how others perceive you, you free up enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy. Energy that was previously devoted to impression management becomes available for creativity, problem-solving, genuine connection, and actually living your life. People often worry that being authentic will lead to rejection, conflict, or social consequences, and sometimes it does. But here's what they don't consider. The people who reject your authenticity were never actually connected to you in the first place. They were connected to your performance. Now, losing those connections doesn't make you lonelier. It makes space for connections that actually nourish you. Let's examine what happens in your brain and body when you shift from performance to presence. The neurological differences between authentic and inauthentic behavior are measurable and profound. When you're being authentic, when your actions align with your values and genuine preferences, your brain shows increased activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, the area associated with self-awareness and intrinsic motivation. Your stress hormone cortisol decreases. Your heart rate variability improves, indicating better emotional regulation. Your immune system functions more effectively. Conversely, when you're performing authenticity or living in contradiction to your values, your brain shows patterns similar to those seen in chronic stress and depression. The anterior cingulate cortex, which processes internal conflict, becomes hyperactive. Your sympathetic nervous system stays elevated, keeping you in a constant state of mild fight or flight. Dr. Kristin Neff's research on self-compassion reveals something crucial. People who treat themselves with kindness and acceptance show greater resilience, better relationships, and more consistent motivation than those who drive themselves through criticism and perfectionism. But self-compassion isn't possible when you're disconnected from your authentic experience. You can't be kind to someone you don't know. And if you don't know who you really are, self-compassion becomes just another performance. The studies on authenticity and well-being are remarkably consistent across cultures. Whether researchers study American college students, Japanese office workers, or Brazilian artists, the pattern holds. People who report higher levels of authenticity show better mental health, stronger relationships, greater life satisfaction, and even better physical health outcomes. But here's the most interesting finding. Authenticity isn't a personality trait, it's a skill. It can be learned, practiced, and strengthened over time. People who struggle with feeling fake aren't fundamentally different from people who feel authentic. They've just had different training. Let me give you a concrete experiment you can try. For the next 30 days, commit to one simple practice. Before you speak, act, or react in any social situation, pause and ask yourself, what's true for me right now? Not what should I say? Not what will make me look good. Not what do they want to hear. Just what's true for me right now. You don't have to share everything that's true. You don't have to be inappropriate or inconsiderate. But staying connected to your truth, even when you choose not to express all of it, keeps you tethered to your authentic self. Days 1 through 7, you'll probably feel awkward, maybe even panicked. You'll realize how much of your communication has been automatic, how often you say things you don't mean or express feelings you don't have. This is normal. You're waking up from a long sleep. Days 8 to 15, you'll start noticing the difference between conversations where you stay connected to yourself and conversations where you disappear into performance. The authentic conversations will feel more alive, more energizing, even when they're more challenging. Days 16 to 23, other people will start responding differently to you. Some will be drawn to your increased presence. Others might feel uncomfortable with your decreased predictability. Both reactions are information, not judgment on your worth. Days 24 to 30, you'll begin to develop what I call authentic confidence. The quiet certainty that comes from knowing yourself and trusting your own judgment. This is different from performed confidence, which depends on external validation. Authentic confidence is stable because it's based on internal rather than external evidence. But here's what's really powerful about this experiment. You're not just changing how you communicate, you're changing your relationship with yourself. You're practicing self-awareness. You're strengthening your capacity to stay present with your own experience rather than immediately editing it for public consumption. The hardest part of authentic living isn't discovering who you are, it's integrating that discovery into a world that often rewards performance over presence. How do you stay real in fake situations? How do you maintain authenticity in contexts that seem to require performance? The answer lies in understanding the difference between authentic adaptation and inauthentic performance. Authentic people aren't rigid, they're responsive. They can be professional without being fake, diplomatic without being dishonest, considerate without being self-abandoning. The key is maintaining what I call core coherence, staying connected to your fundamental values and genuine motivations even when adapting your expression to different contexts. You can speak more formally in a job interview while still being honest about your qualifications. You can be more reserved at a networking event while still being genuine in your interactions. This requires developing what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between subtle variations in your emotional experience. Instead of just fine or stressed, you learn to identify the specific texture of your feelings. Excited but nervous, confident but humble, interested but cautious. This granularity helps you stay connected to your authentic experience even in complex social situations. The ancient Chinese philosophy of Wu-Wei offers another framework. Effortless action. When you're aligned with your authentic self, right action often feels effortless, even when it's challenging. You're not forcing yourself to be someone you're not. You're allowing yourself to be who you are in response to what the situation requires. This doesn't mean you never feel internal conflict or social pressure. It means you remain aware of that conflict rather than automatically resolving it in favor of external expectations. Sometimes authenticity means feeling uncomfortable, saying no, or disappointing people, but it also means not disappearing in the process. As we near the end of this exploration, let's address the deeper truth about why everyone feels fake. We live in a culture that has forgotten how to see people as inherently valuable. Everything around us, advertising, social media, educational systems, workplace cultures, operates on the assumption that people need to earn their worth through achievement, appearance, or approval. We've created a society where being human isn't enough. You have to be a successful human, an attractive human, an impressive human. But authenticity begins with remembering that your worth isn't earned, it's inherent. You don't have to become worthy of love, respect, or belonging. You already are worthy simply by virtue of being a conscious, feeling, thinking, being capable of connection. This isn't spiritual bypassing or positive thinking. This is recognizing a basic fact that our culture has trained us to forget. Your value as a person isn't determined by your productivity, your attractiveness, your achievements, or your social media metrics. These things might affect your circumstances, but they don't affect your fundamental worth as a human being. When you really understand this, not just intellectually, but in your bones, the whole game changes. You stop trying to prove your worth and start expressing it. You stop trying to become someone lovable and start recognizing that you already are someone lovable. You stop waiting for permission to be yourself and start giving yourself that permission. This is why authenticity feels so radical in our current moment. In a culture obsessed with optimization, improvement, and becoming, simply being feels revolutionary. In a world that profits from your dissatisfaction, contentment becomes an act of rebellion. Let's come back to where we started. Remember Maya, sitting in her bathroom, surrounded by the perfect life that felt completely empty? Here's the rest of her story. Maya didn't quit her job, delete her social media, or move to a commune. She didn't throw away everything she'd built. Instead, she started small. She began paying attention to the moments when she felt most like herself and the moments when she felt most like a character she was playing. She discovered that she felt most real when she was cooking. Not the photogenic meals she posted online, but the simple, comforting foods that reminded her of childhood. She felt most like herself during long walks without podcasts or music, just her thoughts and the rhythm of her feet on pavement. She felt most authentic in conversations where she admitted she didn't know something rather than pretending expertise she didn't have. Gradually, she began building a life around these moments of realness rather than around external expectations. She didn't become a different person. She became more herself. She didn't reject all social norms. She just stopped letting social norms override her internal compass. Today, Maya still has Instagram, still works in marketing, still cares about her appearance and her achievements, but she's no longer imprisoned by them. She's learned the difference between having preferences and being enslaved by them, between caring about outcomes and being defined by them. Most importantly, she's learned that authenticity isn't a destination you reach. It's a practice you maintain. Every day, in small ways and large ways, you choose whether to stay connected to your real experience or to disappear into performance. Every conversation, every decision, every moment of social interaction is an opportunity to practice presence or practice performance. The authenticity crisis isn't solved by finding your true self. It's solved by remembering that you never lost your true self. It's been there all along, underneath the layers of shoulds and expectations and learned behaviors. It's the part of you that notices when something feels off, that feels relief when you finally tell the truth, that recognizes authenticity in others even when you struggle to access it in yourself. You don't need to become authentic. You need to stop hiding from your authenticity. You don't need to find yourself. You need to stop losing yourself in other people's expectations. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be present. The world doesn't need another perfectly curated version of you. It needs the real version, messy, complicated, imperfect, and irreplaceably human. Because here's the final truth. In a world full of copies, originals are revolutionary. In a culture of performance, presence is powerful. In an age of fake, real is the rarest and most valuable thing you can offer. Your authenticity isn't just a gift to yourself, it's a gift to everyone whose life you touch. When you show up as who you really are, you give others permission to do the same. When you stop performing perfection, you help others remember that perfection was never the goal. When you choose presence over performance, you create ripples of realness that spread far beyond what you can see. The authenticity crisis ends when enough people remember something our culture has trained us to forget. You are not a problem to be solved. You are not a project to be completed. You are not a brand to be optimized. You are a human being worthy of love and belonging exactly as you are right now in this moment. And that simple, radical truth is where authenticity begins. The question isn't whether you're authentic enough. The question is, are you ready to stop hiding from who you've always been? Because the world is waiting, not for the perfect version of you, but for the real one. And that person, that complicated, imperfect, beautifully human person, has been there all along, just waiting for you to remember that being yourself was never something you needed to earn. It was always something you already were.